Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning and welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm Jim McCarthy, the owner and technical director of Key Solutions, and the host of this show. Given the continued explosive growth of everything related to IT, you have undoubtedly heard of FEDSIM and the assistance they provide to all government agencies. Today we have as our first guest, Tim McCurdy, who is a former director at FEDSIM and is now the owner of Acquisition Excellence. Today, Tim will help us better understand FEDSIM's role and how you can best work with them. And after Tim, I will be joined by John Etherton, the president of Etherton and Associates, who is with us today in his capacity as a member of the Board of Advisors of NCMA. John has a wealth of information to share with us about the policy and legislative issues in contracting for 2014, so let's get right to it. Good morning. I'm with Tim McCurdy, who is the former director of the Federal Systems Integration and Management Center, or FEDSIM. Tim is also the owner of Acquisition Excellence. And Tim, it is a real pleasure to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. So thanks for coming. Appreciate it. So let's get right into it a little bit. Let's talk about you and your background and your credentials. Let's just give a little perspective, okay?
All right. Well, thanks, Jim. Pleasure to be on the show. I started out at FEDSIM back a few years ago as a second lieutenant out of the Air Force. Came from the Air Force Academy, and that was my first assignment. Stayed there for 4 years. At the time, FEDSIM was doing their own computer performance evaluations and modeling those. And so I was a programmer and did that. Went off to the Pentagon for 2.5 years, and that's where I got my first taste of acquisition. Worked in a program office there that was replacing the computer systems for all of the air staff. And as you can see, took 2.5 years, and I didn't actually get to see the award. So it took a little longer back then.
Never saw the fruit of your labors in that sense.
No. And then I went back to FEDSIM. In the interim, they had moved to GSA, and so I came back as a civilian. And at that point, FEDSIM had moved their model, and we're doing more acquisition.
Okay. So that's a little perspective on you. Now let's tell our audience, for those who may not know about FEDSIM, what is FEDSIM? Why does it exist? What need in the marketplace does it meet? What's its mission? Customers, whatever.
All right. Well, FEDSIM is part of GSA now, part of the Assisted Acquisition Service, and their mission is to help other government agencies acquire goods, services, primarily in the IT and professional services arena. They serve all of the federal government. Over the last 40 years, they started in 1972, but over the last 40 years, they've worked with every government agency, every part of DoD, and right now their mix is probably about 60-40 DoD versus civilian, and that mix moves over time. It'll probably move towards 50-50 this upcoming year as they've got some more civilian work that's going to be coming out.
So 60-40, 50-50. The point is it's both on the military side and the sort of the civilian side.
Yes.
And you worked at both.
Yes.
I would think.
So we worked on both.
So what is the major core competency that FEDSIM brings to the table?
Well, it's dual. They have the acquisition experience, and they also have program management. So that's one of the differences, I believe, with FEDSIM, is that rather than just getting an acquisition group, you actually get a hybrid. You get both acquisition, so you get pre-solicitation support, you get the solicitation support, and then you get post-award. You get program management support after the award, all the way through the completion of the program.
Okay, so FEDSIM helps government agencies. Does it ever do its own contracting? Does it have its own support contractors in any way? Or?
Does not do their own necessarily support contracting. Right. I mean, they're supporting other government agencies.
Other government agencies, yeah, okay. All right, well, we're going to take a commercial break right now, and when we come back, I would like to talk about the relationship between FEDSIM and the other GWACs that we'll talk about, okay?
Okay.
FCA has been bringing government and industry together since 1946. By joining FCA, you will reach the decision makers and become part of the discussion. You'll increase market visibility, gain market insight, receive discounts on FCA member services and events, and manage and engage corporate associates. FCA is the association of choice. Join today at www.fca.org.
We at JRC Integrated Systems are proud of our legacy of providing systems engineering expertise to the strategic deterrence community. For more than 10 years, JRC has helped Navy Strategic Systems programs manage the Ohio and Ohio replacement programs. From defining requirements to developing verification plans to building and implementing the program plans to bring a major weapon system to shore-based test environment, we at JRC have become trusted advisors to ACAT-1 programs. In addition to Navy SSP, JRC Integrated Systems has begun providing similar expertise to other related programs in the Missile Defense Agency and other weapon system programs. If you need highly skilled support to help you solve your engineering and programmatic challenges, then we at JRC Integrated Systems invite you to contact us at info@jrcisi.com. So Tim, let's talk about the relationship between FEDSIM and some of the multiple award contracts and so on, like, or GWACs, Alliance Small Business, 8A Stars, VETS GWAC. How are they related?
Well, FEDSIM is a user of those GWACs, has been a big user of all the GWACs over time, a big proponent of those. They lend themselves to the type of acquisitions FEDSIM does, which are large scale, typically cost type contracts. And so they are by far the largest user on Alliant. They were the largest user on Millennia, Millennia Light. I expect that they'll be one of the largest users on Oasis. And on the smaller contracts, the Alliance Small Biz, not as big a user there because it doesn't quite fit their model.
Would, in your view, has those various vehicles that we talked about, have they been successful? Do they need some more fine tuning? You know, where they're headed in general? Any sense of that?
No, I think FEDSIM has found, and I think the community itself has found, that the GWACs do have a place. FEDSIM uses those depending on the acquisition, but again, with the type of work they do, it lends itself to using the GWACs.
Okay. In any sense, does FEDSIM compete with other federal agencies and their acquisition shops? What do you think?
FEDSIM doesn't really view themselves as competition to the acquisition shops. They view themselves more as an option, an alternative. One of the things that you find is acquisition shops, especially on the large jobs, the contracting officers maybe have done one of those in their career, where FEDSIM does it every day. That's their mantra. That's their niche in the market. In terms of other federal agencies, DOI has an acquisition shop that provides support. So in some respects, FEDSIM does compete with DOI.
Okay. So that's sort of competition or lack thereof with federal agencies. Let's talk about the private sector. In what way are the two related? Are they competitors in any space or facilitators? Can you talk to us a little bit about that relationship with the private sector?
FEDSIM really relies on the private sector and in terms of acquisition. So they don't really compete with the private sector at all. So the contracts they put in place are for other agencies, and so they're going to the private sector to fill that need.
Okay. What type of needs does FEDSIM typically meet and address? In other words, what services are you likely to be procuring or helping procure?
FEDSIM does anything in the IT and professional services arena, and so anything that's large scale is really their main thrust. Is
one of the advantages of FEDSIM the fact that it sort of streamlines the process? Does it accelerate an award? Does it in any way save time or money for the federal government or the taxpayers?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. Long answer is they've developed a lot of processes and procedures that help streamline, and in most cases they're 6 months to a year faster in terms of getting an award and being able to sustain that award over time.
Does FEDSIM itself participate in the evaluation of offers or bids? Or
Yes.
It does.
So again, something that's a little bit unique. FEDSIM is part of the acquisition team. They're part of the evaluation board. They have a couple of people on there. And one of the things they rely on is something called an acquisition project manager, who's like an industry counterpart would be the proposal manager.
Right.
So they stick with a proposal and acquisition. At the end of it, they move on to the next one. They also have someone who's the contracting officer's rep or the program manager who's also on the evaluation team. Once the award is made, then they stay on and help ensure that the program itself is successful, because it's really the bottom line is not the acquisition, but it's do you have a successful program at the end?
Successful procurement. Okay. Tim, you've been on both sides of the fence. You've been with the government, and you've been with the private sector and working proposals. One of the things that we'd like to end our show with is we call keys to winning. And so, would you mind giving our audience one or two takeaways about what it is they can do to improve their chances of having success at FEDSIM?
Well, Jim, the focus for FEDSIM are really on the technical approach, your key personnel and staffing, and then your corporate experience. So if you're going in and trying to win a FEDSIM job, you need to look and see, do you really have those keys? So coming up with a technical approach, a lot of people can do that. But do you have the right key people? Do you have the right qualifications? FEDSIM is very specific on what the qualifications for those key people are. And then your corporate experience. Do you have the right corporate experience where you're going to score very well? Because to win at FEDSIM, you really have to be excellent pretty much across the board. And in the end, the processes and procedures FEDSIM have lead to a very fair and reasonable award. And so if you've got those things, then you can expect to win at FEDSIM.
Is the concept of teaming sort of encouraged by FEDSIM or tolerated? How would you think about that?
I would say teaming is encouraged at FEDSIM. Clearly that different companies bring different strengths, and so FEDSIM will basically look at your team as the contractor they're hiring.
So did we win that government contract?
We did.
And?
And now we've got to deal with the regulatory hurdles.
Well, good luck with that.
When the government's your client, you need to play by their rules.
Ah, and the rules change more than you think.
Exactly. We need someone who's done this before. Plus, it's complicated, so we're going with BDO.
BDO?
People who know government contracting know BDO.
Working in contract management is a complex job. Creating, executing, managing contracts. It's an ever-changing world, and our members share the same challenges. At the National Contract Management Association, we know this business, gathering the best minds in our field, furthering your career by providing knowledge and training. Together, we've figured it out.
The U.S. government is the world's largest customer, buying more than $3 trillion a year in goods and services, including more than $500 billion in contracts with foreign companies. To attract more foreign interest, we have developed the Forum, which is geared to embassy representatives, trade missions, and foreign companies seeking to win U.S. federal contracts. The Forum will provide a practical overview on how to effectively navigate the regulations and protocols in the federal marketplace. The Forum, titled Demystifying the U.S. Government Marketplace, will be held on March 19th at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center in Washington, D.C. The speakers and panelists will include foreign trade representatives, foreign company representatives, and professionals in federal contracting. To learn more, go to aockeysolutions.com and click on KSI Buzz for events.
Good morning. Our guest for today is Mr. John Etherton. John is a member of the Board of Advisors for the National Contract Management Association, by the way, which he's done for 30 years, where he's been involved in this association. And John, you're also the president of Etherton and Associates. So why don't you tell our audience about your background and credentials and so on.
Sure, Jim. I've been involved in working acquisition policy issues for over 30 years. Spent a great deal of time, 18 years on Capitol Hill. I worked in the United States Senate, primarily for the Senate Armed Services Committee as a professional staff person from 1985 to 1999, and was involved in all of the acquisition policy legislation that committee oversaw during that period, including Goldwater-Nichols, the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, the acquisition workforce legislation, DOEA, and a number of other things that we did on a year-to-year basis. After that point, I left and worked in the Aerospace Industries Association as Vice President for Legislative Affairs. And we were also heavily involved in a number of acquisition policy issues in the early 2000s. And since that time, I've operated my own consulting business, working with various clients, primarily focusing on these types of issues.
Private sector clients?
Yes,
or
yes,
okay,
yes,
private sector.
yes.
Okay. So let's talk about your association with NCMA. We mentioned the 30-year association. What is NCMA? For those in our guests, our audience who may not know it, tell us about NCMA, its charter, and so on.
NCMA is a National Contract Management Association, and it's primarily an association of acquisition professionals, both in the private sector and in the government. They foster a number of information sharing, professional education, and professional development programs for contract managers and other folks in the acquisition process. My involvement with NCMA has been, I've been a frequent speaker at their events. I've served on their board of advisors for the last several years, and I've been working wherever I can to sort of help them develop a better understanding of what things are happening in Congress.
Well, that's a good organization. It enjoys a very strong reputation in the community.
Yes.
Okay, so you are I'm going to use a term. You're an expert on things of legislation and Capitol Hill and the legislative branch.
Right.
So let's look back at 2013 for a minute. And can you tell us a little bit about what was driving the legislative issues and what did the Congress accomplish during this very tumultuous year?
Right.
Okay.
I would say that a couple things you have to understand going into it. Generally, there's a lot of interest in acquisition policy legislation from a lot of members and a lot of committees. But most of that legislation primarily goes through the defense authorization process. So that if you were tracking the major developments in acquisition policy, a good place to start would be in Title VIII of the National Defense Authorization Bills as they come out of the Senate and as they come out of the House. Some of the major issues that we were looking at this year, one in particular that's gotten a lot of press, has been the cap on allowable reimbursement of compensation costs for defense contractors.
For executives and
right.
so on.
Well,
yes.
it's actually for all contractor employees now. There also were issues involving the relative weighting of price versus other factors in source selection was an issue that was under discussion. We had the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, so-called FITARA, that was included in the House version of the bill and would reorganize information technology acquisition across the government. That was another major issue.
Did it ever make it through both houses?
It did. It made it through the House. It was dropped in the conference. Okay. So that's an issue that will have to be taken up next year. And there were some very important changes to the small business accounting rules, also in Title XVI of that bill.
Right. So the issues you mentioned are certainly well known and felt by a lot of the community. So I think you got your finger on the pulse. I think that's great. Thank you. I'm here with John Etherton, the member of the Board of Advisors for the NCMA, National Contract Management Association. And just a moment ago, we were talking about some of the legislation that took place in the 2013. Now I want to turn to our current year. Just how would you characterize the mood of the Congress when it comes to acquisition and acquisition reform?
I think right now everybody's ready for some big changes. I see a lot of effort right now coming out of the House Armed Services Committee under Congressman Thornberry's leadership to really explore fundamental changes to the way the acquisition process works. I'm getting similar feedback from folks on the Senate side that they want to also look at doing some things that are more fundamental in terms of changing the acquisition process. I'm not sure people really have a sense of where they want to go yet with some of that energy, but I'm seeing a lot of staff effort and a lot of member interest in that, and a lot of effort for folks to educate themselves.
Do you see any areas, or can you share with any
Sure.
any areas of this fundamental change that may be taking place?
Yeah, some of the words that you're hearing now for the first time in about 20 years are words like streamlining the process, trying to clear out some of the underbrush of some of the rules and things like that, maybe to free the process to move a little bit more quickly, looking at the organizations and seeing if there's any reductions that could be made there, and also how to make all the players in the process more accountable.
Okay. Well, you're talking about players in the process, at least from the Capitol Hill standpoint. Who are some of the major players that industry should be aware of and watching, and do they have some positions that we ought to take note of?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that I mentioned Congressman Thornberry. I think he is somebody definitely to watch in the process, and I think that Adam Smith, also the ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, has also expressed a lot of interest in this area, so I think the two of them will be sort of leading the effort coming from the House side. On the Senate side, Carl Levin has been involved as chairman of the Armed Services Committee at times, and also chairman of Governmental Affairs for years on these issues, very knowledgeable. This is his last year in the Senate, so I expect him to be fully engaged this year as he wraps up his Senate career. And Senator McCain, Senator Inhofe are also people that I see as being major players this year in those issues.
So let's switch to the executive branch. We know you've described the legislative role. What role is the executive branch taking? Are they taking a leadership role? Are they following? Are they leading? How would you characterize that particular aspect of government?
I would say that where the administration is right now is they're trying to keep up with what the Congress is really doing. There are a number of initiatives coming out of the Department of Defense, out of Undersecretary of Defense Frank Kendall's office, such as the Better Buying Power Initiative. There's also been some interest in the Deputy Secretary of Defense's office in looking at some broader streamlining efforts as well. So I think they're actively engaged. I think that it will be sort of a neck-and-neck race to see who puts on the table different concepts and who is able to bring them to completion. But there's a lot of ferment right now in the area.
Okay. Well, we're going to pause for a commercial break right now, and when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation relative to acquisition policy.
In this hyper-competitive marketplace, as a federal government contractor, now more than ever, you need to identify, track, forecast, and analyze opportunities that will help you grow your company by better positioning yourself to win contracts. I'm Jamie Bratton, the founder of Easy GovOps, and that's our mission. Utilizing the most intuitive market intelligence platform, Easy GovOps, enables contractors of all sizes to manage their pipeline, collaborate, and team like never before. Experience for yourself the power available to you and your team with a 5-day free trial period with no commitment necessary to begin. Simply visit easygovops.com to start your free trial today. Join the hundreds of other federal government contractors who are enjoying the ultimate competitive advantage of our unequaled market intelligence. Just spend one free week at easygovops.com and see for yourself.
Federal acquisition and program offices are working every day to defend and secure the United States. Hello, I'm Brian Null, President of Blue Water Federal Solutions. We are a growing small business possessing the experience and capabilities found in the largest federal contractors. Since 2005, we've earned a significant number of contracts and task orders across DoD, DHS, and civilian agencies, with major contracts including DHS Eagle, Eagle II, and GSA Alliance Small Business. Our success is achieved through the high-performance teams that are providing disciplined service delivery on complex technical solutions, meeting cost and schedule with exceptional customer feedback and official CPAR ratings. To learn how we can deliver exceptional results on your mission requirements, go to bluewaterfederal.com and click on Contact Us. Blue Water Federal, solutions, integrity, results.
We're back now with John Etherton from the NCMA, National Contract Management Association. By the way, I served on the Hill too for about 6.5 years. I got the scars to prove it, by the way. So your longevity is really very impressive. But I want to turn to you about your organization now. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
How does NCMA or similar organizations play a role as a stakeholder in this acquisition process? And have they taken any key fundamental positions that you would like to at least describe for us?
I think that NCMA's major value that they bring to the process is they serve as a forum for a couple of very important things. They are a great organization for getting the word out for the changes that are either in process or that have already occurred that are being reflected in the regulatory regime or in any administrative memos, and to really help educate the workforce so that they can keep current with a lot of these things. We've seen unprecedented changes in the last 5 years coming through the legislative process, and NCMA is one of the organizations that really helps keep the members up to speed on the things and what they can expect coming in the future. The other thing I think, and I think now more than ever is very critical for NCMA, is they serve as a great clearinghouse for getting people from the industry, getting people from the government together, as well as even people from Congress, staff people, so that they can have a good dialogue,
Yes,
in areas where now travel budgets are being cut back and other kinds of things. The NCMA fora really provide those opportunities both at the local level and at the national level for a lot of that necessary dialogue to occur.
Well, they're good comments, John. We have less than a minute here, but what I'd like to do is to wrap up is ask you if there was one comment, one thought, one takeaway, one leave behind that you would like to leave our audience with as they're watching this morning. What do you think that might be?
I think that folks should expect that further change is coming. I know that folks think that up till now we've seen a lot of changes over the last 4 or 5 years. I see a lot of energy right now pushing further change. I don't know if we'll see a lot of it reflected in legislation this year, but whatever we don't see this year is going to happen next year.
Would you characterize it as good or bad change from the industry's perspective?
I think from the industry's perspective, it will probably be good change. But it will require everybody to be fully engaged, both the government decision makers as well as people in industry that are affected by a lot of this. I think we're all going to have to sit at the table and play a role.
Thank you. Okay, well, we hear a little bit about a clarion for change in the future, but I want to thank you, John Etherton, for being on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back sometime and visit us.
I'd love to.
So, thank you very much. I want to thank Tim McCurdy of Acquisition Excellence and John Etherton of Etherton Associates. He joined us today as a member of the Board of Advisors of NCMA. Most importantly, I want to thank you, our viewers, for once again making Government Contracting Weekly a regular part of your learning regimen. On behalf of all my colleagues here at AOC Key Solutions, I'm Jim McCarthy, and I'll see you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.